The 2026 Giants are not losing for just one reason. Yes, the roster has legitimate talent problems. The rotation wasn't deep enough. The bullpen wasn't talented enough. And those problems have been obvious since before the season even began. But a lack of talent does not explain why Tyler Mahle not knowing he was on a pitch count. It does not explain a bullpen that didn't know which pitcher was supposed to enter the game. It doesn't explain players losing track of the count, losing track of the number of outs, or constantly making mental mistakes on the bases. It doesn't explain questionable lineups, poor bullpen management, or an organization that appears completely disconnected from top to bottom. The Giants had a flawed roster, but the people in charge constantly found ways to make that flawed roster even worse. And that's why today we're asking one simple question. How did the Giants become one of the most dysfunctional organizations in baseball? Welcome back to the Orange and Black. I'm Sean Holloway in this channel where we break down everything San Francisco Giants using analytics, the eye test, common sense, and a healthy dose of honesty. Today is not a reaction video. It isn't about one bad game. It isn't about one blown save. It isn't about one player. This is a full season evaluation of where this organization stands. At the All-Star break, the Giants sit at 41-55, and they've had a losing record since opening day. There has never been a stretch where this team looked like a legitimate contender. Sorry, words are hard. Instead, the season has felt like one long attempt to climb out of a hole they dug themselves into since the first week of the season. Now, before anyone jumps in the comments saying, well, Sean, the roster isn't good enough, I agree. I 100% agree, especially on the pitching side. I've been very vocal about that. The bullpen wasn't built well enough. The rotation lacks depth. You have Logan Webb, and that's about it. There simply wasn't enough talent on the mound, but that's where I think the conversation changes. Talent deficiencies explain some losses, but they don't explain organizational dysfunction, communication failures, terrible fundamentals, mental mistakes, poor decision-making, and they definitely don't explain the lack of accountability. That's what I want to talk about today, because I don't think this season failed because of just one person or just one player. I think it has failed because almost every level of this organization has failed to do their job. So let's start where every conversation like this should begin, at the very top. Whenever a team underperforms this badly, the first question has to be, who built this roster? Now, ultimately, that responsibility belongs to Buster Posey. Now, let me be very clear. I love Buster. I love him. He's one of the greatest Giants to ever wear the uniform. He's a future Hall of Famer. In my opinion, first ballot. He's one of the biggest reasons Giants fans experienced World Series championships 3 and 5, right? None of that changes. None of that changes. But being a legendary player doesn't automatically make someone a great president of baseball operations. Those are two completely different jobs. And based on the results over the past 2 seasons, I think it's fair to start asking some very difficult questions, because this roster simply wasn't built well enough. So let's start with pitching, because that's where Buster Posey addressed it on the moment he took over. He preached pitching and defense. This was supposed to be the organization's identity, right? So naturally, you expect one of the deepest bullpens in baseball, a reliable rotation, a team that wins close games because it prevents runs. Instead, the bullpen became one of the biggest weaknesses on the roster. The rotation lacked depth, and the defense often looked sloppy. The identity Posey talked about never became reality, then looked at the offseason, right, and chose Tyler Mahle, chose Adrian Hauser. They chose to roll with Sam Hentges and Jason Foley after moving on from Tyler Rogers. 2 guys coming off of major shoulder surgery. They entered the season without an established closer. They just hoped Ryan Walker could turn it around, which clearly, no. They didn't spend any money, or didn't spend enough, I should say, to address obvious weaknesses. And they continued hanging onto contracts that clearly weren't working. Now, every front office misses. That's baseball. Nobody's perfect. No executive bats 1,000. But when almost every major addition disappoints, eventually it stops being bad luck. It becomes a roster construction problem. Outside of Luis Ariz, who's really worked? Let's be honest. Who's really worked? That's a serious question. Who can you point to and say that acquisition made this team significantly better? It's not Harrison Bader. He's played like 30 games this season. He's been injured since what? May? Early June? It's definitely not Adrian Hauser. It's definitely not Tyler Mahle. Who? I honestly struggle to find many answers. And that's why I think Posey deserves criticism. Not because every move failed, but because the overall vision never came together. And what made it even more frustrating was the messaging. Throughout the season, we kept hearing no regrets or, oh, you must have wanted Edwin Diaz. The bullpen wasn't viewed internally as a major concern. But us fans knew. We all knew. Other people outside the organization knew the bullpen would be an issue. You saw that all throughout the offseason. Oh, the Giants bullpen, there's not enough arms there. Even some of the beat writers were complaining about it. Meanwhile, us fans are watching the exact opposite happen on the field than what internally the Giants thought. And that's probably what frustrates me the most. None of the mistakes were made. You know, it's not that mistakes were made, because that happens. Mistakes happen. It's the unwillingness to acknowledge the mistakes. When you have a president of baseball operations get flustered and say, "Oh, well, I guess you just wanted Edwin Diaz," as if that was the only reliever on the market. That's where we have issues. Good organizations admit when something isn't working. Great organizations fix it. The Giants spent way too much time pretending things weren't as bad as everyone could clearly see. Now, to be fair, building a flawed roster doesn't automatically doom a season. Good managers find ways to maximize imperfect teams all the time, which brings us to the next person in this conversation, Tony Vitello. Now, I want to start off this section by saying something positive. Tony Vitello was never put in an easy situation. He inherited a roster with obvious flaws, especially on the pitching side, but there isn't a manager alive who could take a weak bullpen and turn it into an elite one. That is completely unrealistic, but two things can be true at the same time. The roster wasn't good enough, and Tony Vitello made it worse. Now remember, this is his first year managing in Major League Baseball, coming directly from college. There's always going to be a learning curve. They even said it in the announcements, right? In the press conference. There's going to be a learning curve. I expected growing pains. Now, what I didn't expect is how often the Giants would struggle with basic in-game management. Now, mind you, they surrounded him with Jace Tingler, a former manager. Ron Washington, a former manager. He has access to Dusty Baker, Bruce Bochy, both former managers. Yet, the bullpen management was inconsistent all season. The pinch hitting decisions often left me scratching my head. The bench was underutilized. There were players occupying roster spots who barely even saw the field. And at one point, the Giants had 3 catchers. 3. Why? What was the point of that? Yet, the third catcher never played. So then you have to ask, why is he even on the roster? If you're unwilling to use him, that's a wasted roster spot. That spot could have gone to another reliever, to another position player, a pinch runner, a defensive replacement for that matter. Someone who could actually contribute to this team. Instead, the same struggling players continue to get opportunities while other players barely even left the bench. Then you have the whole Bryce Eldridge situation, right? Whether you blame Vitello or the front office or both, it does not matter because miscommunication there. The entire situation felt poorly managed. Then you have a prospect that is that important. There should be a clear development plan. There should be nobody asking questions. What is the development plan for this kid? Instead, everything felt reactionary. Then you move over to the lineup construction. You have Matt Chapman leading off. Why? He's a really streaky hitter. He's just not a leadoff hitter, right? He's not a leadoff hitter by any means. Then you have the whole splitting up of Jung-Hoo Lee and Bryce Eldridge when they were, had their hitting, when Jung-Hoo Lee had his hitting streak going and Bryce Eldridge with his on-base streak going. You split them up. They were the two guys that were constantly producing for your team, yet you split them up. If something is working, don't fix it. Don't break it up. Right? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like, why are we changing it? That makes no sense. Like, sometimes baseball is actually pretty freaking simple. Don't overmanage. Managers often get into trouble when they're trying to prove how smart they are, instead of allowing the game to come to them. And throughout the season, it felt like the Giants constantly outsmarted themselves. Now, some people will hear everything I said and respond, well, Sean, he's just a rookie manager. You're right. He is. That's a fact. That is a damn fact. But being a rookie manager, it explains the mistakes, but it doesn't excuse repeating the same ones throughout the entire season. Good managers learn. The Giants rarely looked like they were learning. Instead, the same issues continued showing up over and over and over again. But honestly, the biggest issue wasn't even bullpen management. It was lineup construction. Or it wasn't even bullpen management. It wasn't even lineup construction. It wasn't even bench usage. Right? The biggest issue was that this organization didn't seem to be communicating with itself. And that's where I think the entire season really started to fall apart. And that's where I'm going to go next. Now let's start with what I believe became the biggest problem for this organization. Communication. Because once communication breaks down, everything else starts falling apart. The best organizations in baseball don't just have talented players, they're organized. Everyone knows their role, everyone understands the plan, everyone is pulling in the same direction. I never got that feeling from the Giants this season. Take the Tyler Mahle situation. Apparently, Mahle didn't know that he was pitching under a pitch count restriction. Now it makes sense that he would, because he's coming off the injured list. But they didn't say, hey, at 85 pitches, you're done, or whatever. Now think about that for a second. How does a starting pitcher not know what his workload is supposed to be before he even takes the mound? That conversation should happen well before first pitch. The manager should know, the pitching coach should know, the catcher should know, the pitcher should know. There shouldn't be any confusion. Then there was the bullpen incident where there was confusion over which reliever was supposed to come in the game. It got to the point where I think it was Willie Adames had a signal to the bullpen because they didn't know who was supposed to come in. Right? Again, how does that happen? Major League Baseball is built on preparation. When the bullpen phone rings, everyone should know exactly what's happening. Who's getting loose? Who's entering? What's the matchup? Instead, it looks like nobody even knew. Nobody even knew. Those aren't isolated mistakes either. Those are symptoms of an organization that it isn't completely communicating effectively. And unfortunately, it doesn't stop there. Communication and leadership go hand in hand because once communication starts slipping, accountability usually follows. And I don't think there was enough accountability anywhere in this organization. Players continued making the same mental mistakes, running into outs, missing signs, losing track of the count, losing track of the number of outs. Poor situation of baseball. Mistakes kept happening and happening and happening, yet very little seemed to change. Now, I'm not saying players should lose their jobs because of one mistake. Baseball doesn't work that way. Baseball is a sport that is built on mistakes and errors and failure, right? If you hit 300, you're only successful 30% of the time, and you're considered elite. So, yeah, even the best players make errors. But there's a difference between making a mistake and repeatedly making the exact same preventable mistake time after time after time. Those are mental mistakes. You should improve as the season goes along. Instead, the Giants look like they were making the same mistakes in July that they were making in April. That's coaching. That's preparation. That is leadership. And that's why I keep coming back to accountability. Who was being held accountable? Was it the players? No. Was it the coaching staff? No. Was it the front office? No. Because from the outside looking in, it felt like everyone was pointing the fingers at somebody else, right? For example, the whole Bryce Eldridge situation. First it was, hey, this is a group decision between Tony, Zach, and Buster. Then Zach was asked about it a couple of days or weeks later. He said, oh, well, that's a Tony decision. Like, that's just an example, right? So if you're just pointing fingers, then nobody's taking accountability. When things went wrong, the roster wasn't good enough. The manager made the wrong move. The players didn't execute. The bullpen failed. The offense disappeared. But eventually, someone has to own it. Leadership isn't about taking credit when things go well. Leadership is standing in front of your team when things are going poorly. And I never felt that there was a clear voice leading this organization. Everything felt disconnected. The front office, the coaching staff, the clubhouse. It felt like three different groups instead of one organization. And eventually, that showed up every single night on the field. When people asked me what frustrated me most this season, it honestly wasn't a lack of talent. It was how the Giants beat themselves. There were nights where the other team barely had to do anything. Like, the Giants made life easy for them. They started, let's start with base running, for example. It's awful. It's awful. The Giants constantly made unnecessary outs on the bases. They were overly aggressive in bad situations, then passive in situations they should have been aggressive. Then, there would never seem to be a constant philosophy. Then you have the mental mistakes, losing track of the count, losing track of the number of outs, running into easy outs, missing opportunities to advance runners. Those things kids learn in youth baseball. Those mistakes should be less frequent as the season goes along. Instead, the Giants never clean them up. Then defensively, the execution simply wasn't good enough. Again, Posey preached about pitching and defense. Defense is more than just errors, it's positioning, communication, relay throws, cutoff men, executing a routine play, playing clean baseball. Far too often, the Giants failed in those areas. That's why I keep saying this team felt like amateur hour. Not because the players lacked talent, not because they weren't trying, but because the mental side of the game constantly broke down. Championship teams make the routine outs look boring. The Giants made the routine out feel difficult. And when you're already dealing with a roster that lacks pitching depth, you can't afford to give away extra outs. Yet the Giants did it all season long. Now, one thing that has always been true about this channel, and it's been very important, is balancing analytics with common sense. Now, analytics aren't supposed to replace baseball knowledge. They're just there to support it. The numbers, the eye test, the common sense, right? Now, when all three of those point in the same direction, that's usually the right decision. Too often, though, the Giants just seem to ignore them, right? Take Adrian Hauser, for example. Left-handers were absolutely crushing him all season. At one point, they had an OPS over 1,000 against him. So naturally, right, my question is, why aren't they using an opener? Why is Hauser allowed to face these left-handers immediately? Why not manipulate the inning? Why put him in a better position to succeed? The Giants just kept doing the same thing time after time and expecting different results. That's not adjustment, right? That's not adjustments at all. That's just stubbornness. Then you look at Ketel Marte. They flipped him to a stronger side in the ninth inning of a close game. Sure, he'd been struggling all season, but it's only a matter of time. And like clockwork, walks it off. Again, I'm not saying the numbers are always right, but if you're going to ignore them, there better be a good baseball reason. Too often, I couldn't find one. It felt like the Giants either ignored the data or misunderstood how to apply it. Good organizations use analytics as another tool. The Giants often treated them like an afterthought, or worse, made decisions that seemed to contradict that information, that available information. Moving on to the next section, right? The personal decisions only added to my frustrations. Let's start behind the plate. The Giants moved on from Patrick Bailey because they wanted more offense. I understood that logic. Bailey struggled offensively. No one's going to argue otherwise. He has not hit since coming into the league. But here's the question. Did the Giants actually become better after moving on from him? I don't think they ever did. I don't. I strongly don't. The catching group became a combination of Andrew Suzak, Eric Haas, and Rodriguez, and I think there's one other, Drew Cavanaugh now. Drew Cavanaugh. Meanwhile, the pitching staff got worse. The defense got worse. The team's ERA dramatically climbed. There are even reports and discussions that pitchers were calling their own games. Right? Now, Logan Webb, we know he calls his own games from time to time, or sequences or whatever. But Landon Roop started calling his own games. I think Trevor McDonald started doing it as well. I'm not entirely sure if that's accurate, but just the fact that those conversations were happening tells you something. That Bailey, or the Giants lost more than just Bailey's bat. They lost his game management, his pitch framing, his relationship with the pitching staff, and his defensive value. He has been the best catcher, or even the best defender in baseball since his debut by a wide margin. No one's even close. No one's even in the same stratosphere as him. So if you're going to trade away the best defensive catchers, one of the best defensive catchers in baseball, you need a clear plan to replace everything that he brings. And I never felt the Giants had that plan. They were just searching for offense and just throwing spaghetti at a wall and hopefully something sticks. Then you have the whole Gerard Encarnacion situation. Again, why? Why? Why continue giving opportunities to a player who does not appear to be a part of the future, when there are younger players in the system who deserve an opportunity? Victor Barracoto. Wonderful spring. Far better than Encarnacion. And he's been nothing but great since being called up to the big leagues. Gerard got the opening day roster spot over him. Why? At some point, you have to find out what you have, especially in the seasons that's gone the way that it has. Right, the Giants spent too much time looking backward instead of looking forward, and that brings us to the next big, the next big question of all. After everything we've talked about, roster construction, game management, communication, fundamentals, analytics, personal decisions, all that, what does all I have to say about the state of this organization? Because that's the conversation we need to have before talking about the future. Now that we've looked at the roster, the manager, the communication, fundamentals, the analytics, all that, right? Personal decisions, all that. I think one question remains. What exactly is the identity of this organization? Because honestly, I don't know. Buster Posey told us this team was going to be built about pitching and defense. Instead, pitching is not good. Defense sucks. Right? The bullpen's not good enough at all. Tony Vitello was brought in to establish a new culture. Instead, the Giants continue to make the same mistakes from opening day to the All-Star break. Communication has broken down. Accountability is almost non-existent. Fundamentals have not improved. The lineup construction never changed. The bullpen was inconsistent. The organization never seemed to establish a clear direction, and that's why I don't think the season can be blamed on one person. It's easy to blame the manager. It's easy to blame the front office. It's easy to blame the bullpen. Right? It's easy to blame injuries too, even though the Giants really haven't been all that injured this year. But the reality is, everyone deserves a piece of blame. Posey deserves criticism for how the roster is built. Vitello deserves criticism of how this roster has been managed. The coaching staff deserves criticism for the lack of preparation and fundamentals. The players deserve criticism because they're the ones between the lines making the mistakes. This isn't one failure. It's an organizational failure. From the front office to coaching staff to clubhouse, this organization has failed to become what it said it wanted to be. And that's the most disappointing part, because I truly believe that this team has good enough talent to be better than 41-55. I'm not saying they should have that they're going to win the division, or I say they're World Series contenders, but I absolutely believe they should have played cleaner baseball. They should be a lot closer to 500 at least. At the bare minimum, a lot closer than 14 games under 500. I believe they should have been more prepared. I think they should have been communicated better. I believe there should have been, players held accountable. I believe there should have been, they should have looked more organized. Instead, almost every single night, it felt like the Giants found another way to lose. Not because the other team was overwhelmingly better, but because they made one more mistake, one more mental error, one more poor decision, one more missed opportunity. That's why I keep coming back to the phrase I've used throughout this video, amateur hour. Because that's exactly how this season has looked like. As frustrating as the season has been, there is one thing the Giants absolutely cannot do. They cannot convince themselves they're only one or two players away. Right? They're not. This isn't a quick fix. This organization needs a reset. And I think it starts with this year's trade deadline. If I'm Buster Posey, almost everyone is available. Outside of the core players that will be a part of the future, everyone else should be on the table. That is including Logan Webb. And for him, it's a completely different reason than if he's a part of the future. We know that they're not going to spend the money on him when he becomes a free agent in 2 years. So that's a whole separate conversation. But everyone else who's not going to be a part of the future should be made available. Right? Because this season has already told us what this roster is. Trying to save it by adding another reliever or another veteran bat, or it would just delay the rebuild that needs to happen. Instead, use this deadline to build the next great Giants team. The Giants currently have a farm system that's generally viewed around baseball as a top 10, right? That's a great foundation. Now imagine adding another strong draft class, right? They just have this one right now where they got Jackson Flora and they got Carson Bullman, or however you say his last name. I don't know. For some reason I'm blanking on it, but those two guys who instantly become two top 10 guys in their system, right? So if you can get another strong draft class next year, right, and turning veterans into more high-end prospects, right, suddenly you're talking about a farm system that could legitimately push into the top 5 of baseball even by the end of this season, right? That's something to build sustainability, not by patching holes, by building waves of talent. And honestly, I thought the Giants took a very smart approach at this year's draft. They recognize that one of the biggest weaknesses in this organization is pitching. So what did? They attacked it. Jackson Flora at number 4. Carson Bullman at number 29. One of the top high school pitchers available, the second best lefty in the draft, right? 2 first-rounders pitching that instantly become top 10 guys, right? They went after and got Peyton Bonds, which I'm kind of happy about because I tweeted about it saying, hey, they've the opportunity to do something funny, right? Have another Bonds in the organization. It's Barry Bonds' nephew, for you guys that don't know. He has legitimate crazy power. Doesn't lift the ball, but that can be taught. You can teach the guy to lift the ball more. But he's got crazy power. If he can tap into that, you have another massive 6'8", mammoth, I think he's 6'5", I think. It could be 6'8". I don't know. He's a tall dude. I just know that. He could launch the ball and probably hit the Coke bottle, right? Now, whether those guys become stars, nobody knows. Nobody knows. That's impossible to predict because sometimes even the number 1 overall flop, right? Even the number 2 overall guys can flop. So Predicting if these guys are going to be stars or not, nobody knows. But I like the philosophy the Giants went with. They finally acknowledged where they're weak and used the draft to begin addressing those weaknesses. Now, they have to continue that process. Player development becomes everything, moving at this point forward. Player development needs to continue, and all that stuff. Randy Wynn has been great. He has completely transformed how this player development has been within this organization. You love to see it, going from 29th, seen as the 29th, ranked farm system like a year and a half ago, to now being a top 10 in that short period of time. And you could legitimately, depending on how this draft goes, they could potentially be a top 5 farm system by the end of the year. So in 2 years, going from 29th to top 5, that would be insane. Completely insane. Now, after everything I have said today, you might think I believe this organization is hopeless. I don't. Not even close. There is still reason to be excited. Casey Schmidt has taken a huge step forward. Bryce Eldridge looks like he has a chance to become a cornerstone player. Rafi Devers has reminded everyone why he's one of the best hitters in baseball. He has turned the season around since May. Right? Jung-Hoo Lee has finally started looking like the player the Giants fans thought they were signing. Logan Webb continues to prove he's an ace on this staff. There are legitimate building blocks there. That's why I don't think this organization needs to tear everything down. I think it just needs direction, right? It needs leadership, it needs accountability, it needs roster, a better roster construction, it needs better communication, but most importantly, it needs an identity. Because right now, if I ask Giants fans what the team identity is, I'd probably get 10 different answers. That's a problem. Good organizations know exactly who they are. The Dodgers know who they are, the Braves know who they are, and right now, I'm not sure the Giants do at all. At the end of the day, this video is not about piling on. It's not about whether or not Buster Posey can do the job. It's not about whether Tony Vitello can ever become a good major league manager. It's about accountability. When things go well, everyone deserves credit. When everything goes bad, everyone deserves criticism. And right now, the Giants have earned every bit of criticism you possibly could imagine. Because this season has been disappointing, to say the least. Not simply because they've lost games, but because they've constantly looked unprepared to win. The good news, however, every problem we've talked about can be fixed. Better roster construction can improve. Communication can improve. Fundamentals can improve. Leadership can improve. Player development can improve. The question is whether this organization recognizes those problems, or whether we hear more comments about having no regrets. Because next season, those excuses won't be good enough. Now, I do want to hear from you, right? How much responsibility do you think belongs to Buster Posey, and how much belongs to Tony Vitello? What would you do at the trade deadline? And what do you think the identity of this team should be moving forward? Now, if you like today's breakdown, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never have to miss another Orange and Black podcast episode. Follow me on X and Instagram at orange_blackpod. And thank you for watching. I'm Sean Holloway, and I'll see you on the next one. Go Giants.